Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back talking about surf fishing mistakes. Mistakes, probably one of the most costly things out there, besides buying, all the wrong tackle and stuff, which we'll talk about a little bit in this podcast. But mistakes we've all done there. It's part of fishing. It's part of being an angler. You got to learn. And so we have two guests on here who have spent a lot of time in the surf on the beach. Even Wyatt just got back from the jetty and fishing on piers. And there is so much to learn. And the beauty about fishing is that it's like this never ending puzzle, right? You're constantly just going out there and trying new things and listening and meeting people out there and watching what they're doing, watching what's working, watching what's not working. And so this whole podcast is going to be things that haven't worked and things that we've all learned from over the years. So I got Wyatt and we have Courtney making her debut on the Salt Strong podcast. And for those of you who don't know Courtney, she lives up in Jacksonville. And she is one of our most recent team members, and she is our editor in chief. That was a position we've been trying to fill for a long time, and it wasn't from lack of people trying. We had tons of resumes and just didn't find that right person. We finally found her, and she was actually kind of building her own little kind of side brand there in Jacksonville, which is really, really cool. And she talk about that in a little bit. And we absolutely just loved her. We're like, all right, she loves fishing. She gets this. She loves writing, and she's actually great in front of a camera. And she said, that she and her husband have somewhat mastered surf fishing up there in that neck of the woods. So I was like, how cool would it be to bring on two of our team members who do spend a lot of time on the beach, in the surf, piers, jetties, etc., and just talk about the lessons learned over the years. So welcome, Courtney.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
First ever. So we'll let
Yes,
you kick it off. What's one of those mistakes that right off the bat when you started, because I know you didn't always live in Florida, you lived a
right.
little bit up north, and you come down here. What's one of those like, man, I wish someone would have just told me this?
So I think one of the biggest things that if I could go back a couple of years and tell myself is go scout the beaches at low tide. It is very hard you don't have that technology when you're on the beach, right? So you don't have a fish finder. You are the fish finder. And so scouting at low tide, you're able to find those runouts. You're able to really see the structure. You could see the sandbars a little bit better. And it really gives you that edge instead of just showing up, maybe not knowing what the tide is, and just going, well, I think I'm just going to cast out there and pray for the best. If you go at low tide, you can really see the cuts and the deep troughs, and you can kind of pinpoint where the fish are going to be. And the next day, or maybe you're just waiting for the tide to come in. You've kind of got that pinpointed. And so I think scouting is one of the biggest things that I wish I knew when we first started, because it would have saved a lot of time.
I love it. It's also a business analogy. Warren Buffett was famous for saying, "You got to get to see who didn't have pants on when the tide goes out." And he was talking about people losing money in the stock market when it's easy to make money when everything's going well at high tide, and all of a sudden the tide goes out, and you see people who are kind of exposed and were a little
Yep.
bit too leveraged. But in your case, we're talking about structure, right? And I think so many people, especially if you're on vacation and you're not used to being on the beach fishing, and it all looks the same, right? We hear that over and over.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I'm on vacation and it just all looks the same. It's just this big stretch of sand, and I don't see any structure, because in their minds they're used to seeing oyster bars or
Right.
mangroves or something like that. And unless you happen to have a pier or jetty or some kind of inlet or pass near you, in most cases, it kind of can look the same, but the low tide, it does reveal a ton. So like talk through that, because that's really important. What are you looking for at like dead low tide? Are you looking for certain dips, for troughs, for birds in certain areas on bait? What are you looking for?
I mean, so specifically at low tide, I'm looking for the runouts. I'm looking for
What's
where,
what's a run out for the
I'm looking for where the water is meeting, and it is literally running back into the ocean. So, that's where a lot of your bait is going to hold. And you know, other than that, I'm looking for the deeper troughs. Um, once you can identify where those runouts are and where the troughs are, you can kind of see, okay, at high tide, if I'm walking the beach at low tide and I see where my high tide, water mark is it going to be 100 yards that I have to cast, 50 yards that I have to cast to that deep trough? And so then you can really kind of dial in how far you're going to need to cast at certain tides. So that's really something that I look for. And then, let's say at high tide, I come up on a beach or somebody's on vacation and, they don't know what to look for. I'm looking for the sandbars, the crashing waves, and then the white water in front of that, and then it getting a little, clearer, and then maybe another crashing wave on the shore break. And, that's, there are several ways to kind of identify those deeper holes. We could probably do a whole podcast on just that. But, once you have that dialed in and you can find the deeper water and exactly where those rips are and essentially find, the fish highway, you can key in on where you need to cast. That's the biggest thing, is knowing where to cast.
Love it. Wyatt, anything to add to that?
No, I would 100% agree. It's one of the biggest mistakes is not knowing the area that you're fishing. If you're just walking out there blindly casting, you could be wasting a lot of time. Most of the time you will be, because you're not putting your bait, like you said, in the right spot. And you'd be surprised what you see at low tide on a beach that looks completely barren. When I was up in the Carolinas, I had this stretch of beach that, I just thought it was open sand. There was nothing there other than, maybe a trough here and there, a break and some sandbars. And I went out on a full moon on a low tide, just walking the beach with my dog. And I saw rock piles out a couple hundred yards off the beach. With the big tide swings we get in the Carolinas, I was finally able to see a piece of structure hundreds of yards off the beach. And that is huge. Any kind of structure off the beach is really big. A lot of times you can see that stuff on satellite maps, but depending on when the image was taken, the water might have been cloudy. There might have been a wave breaking over that structure. And a lot of times in those zones where there is a lot of wash, there's not a whole lot of scouting for structure you're doing. You're more looking at where a possible rip or trough might be when you're looking at satellite imagery. It's very rare that I actually do see some form of structure. But going out on low tide, especially during a major lunar event like a new or a full moon, really gives you a good scope of what's going on the beach that you're fishing. And knowing where that structure is, putting your bait close by, that can do amazing things for the amount of fish that you catch, especially if you're fishing static with, natural baits, and it lures as well. But especially if you're going to be putting a bait in one spot for a long time, you need to make sure that spot has a very good chance of producing. You could have the right bait, as we're going to talk on a little bit later. Could be the right bait for the right species, but if it's not in the right spot, it's not going to matter.
Did you go back to that spot you found in North Carolina?
I did. And I caught pompano, drum. It was a fantastic area that I'd fished, a couple hundred yards to the right, a couple hundred yards to the left. I hadn't really thought there was anything there. You wouldn't have known it, but going back there, putting baits to the left and the right of those rocks closer. At both sides of the tide produced fish. So structure is really, really important off the beach.
That's cool. All right. Who's got the next one? Or I guess, Wyatt, I'll pass it to you since Courtney nailed that first one.
Yeah. So
another big mistake.
Yeah. And we just touched on, I would say, the seasonality of surf fishing. I see a lot of people just show up to the beach, on vacation during, the middle of summer or what give you, and they're looking for a specific target species, or they're wanting to catch a specific fish that just might not be running that time of year. And they spend all of their time throwing a very specific bait for that fish or throwing a specific lure for that fish. And it's very unlikely that fish is going to be there. And a perfect example of this is when I was younger, I'd be going to the beach in the summertime, expecting to catch tons and tons and tons of pompano, because I'd seen so many pictures on social media and whatnot of people catching a lot of pompano. Now, those pictures had been taken 2 months prior when the spring run was occurring. Each fish has a migration run that happens right now. One of the I mean, I was on it this morning. There's a ton of Spanish mackerel off the beaches and jetties right now because there's a lot of snot bait in here in Texas, a lot of small shad that's hatching. And these are, you know, they literally look like, you blow a snot rocket, literally looks like snot. It's bait that's like dime sized. And you catch these mackerel and they're spitting it up all over the place. I had puke all over me this morning from the Spanish I was catching. But it's all synced up with either fish are moving with temperatures or they're moving with certain bait. So it definitely is worthwhile to go to your tackle shops, find out what the seasonality of your area is. When do certain things kick off? You know, when I was in the Carolinas, you had the drum run that occurs in the fall, and, you know, those fish show up in the inlets because they're spawning. I mean, there's things that happen, you know, at different times of the year that you have much higher chances of success to get on certain fish, certain species. So don't expect to just go to your surf fishing location, your jetty, your pier, and catch a specific species just because that's what you want to catch. You should really be tailoring your fishing expedition based on what is running at that time. What's the best possible chance, you know, species for you to go after. But there's also, you know, certain baits that you need to be using at certain times of year as well. So knowing your target species, but knowing why they're in those areas. You know, we were talking before this started, Courtney had a great point on using the wrong baits at the wrong times of the year. If you want to expand on that a little bit further, I usually use a lot of lures. I used to use natural baits, but as you know, I've kind of transitioned more to the inshore side of things. I rarely find myself using natural baits, but that's not to say that they aren't extremely effective. I mean, I see a lot of guys on the jetties and in the surf catching a ton of fish on natural baits. It's not something that I've practiced a lot recently, but I can let you expand on that, Courtney.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really just the whole concept of matching the hatch, right? So I mean, if sand fleas aren't here, I mean, they're always here, but they may be so buried down deep that, you know, you're not going to find them. But if sand fleas are not the predominant bait, if clams aren't showing up on the beach, you know, you need to use something else. I mean, don't go buy frozen sand fleas that have been sitting in the freezer for 6 months, because that's when they were here, and then try to throw them out and think you're going to really be productive. So, you know, I would definitely say, and not just, you know, bait for the time of year, but making sure you have enough of a variety of the bait that makes sense. You know, I wouldn't just show up with sand fleas. You know, I would show up with sand fleas and, you know, maybe some fresh dead shrimp. But, you know, definitely having, you know, fish change their diet, right? Just because they're eating sand, just because the pompano are eating sand fleas yesterday doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily want to eat them to, you know, today or tomorrow. You know, so, you know, making sure that you have a variety of bait, but a variety of bait that makes sense for that time. I think that's a great point, Wyatt.
Ties in with what Luke said in his book, Redfish Secrets. Know thy target species. We had some friends who flew in from Arizona. I won't name their names, but they're twins. So there's only 2 twins that came to visit us in the last year and a half. But they came in late February, like February 20 something. And, you know, they're all excited. And guess what they wanted to catch? Tarpon. Because they had seen some tarpon, like a tarpon video. And they were like, so I was like, this is the worst time ever to try to catch tarpon in Tampa Bay areas. Like there's certainly some, just like there's resident pompano in Jacksonville and sure in Texas and everywhere. You could probably find one if you sat there long enough. I was like, it could take us a week to even see one, let alone catch one. And so it's so incredibly important. And that's a big part, you know, of our Salt Strong Insider Club, is just constantly letting all of our members know what's running, what's biting, what's happening right now. Like, here's your best chance to go get tight lines, and or here's your best types of areas to go get inshore saltwater slams. That part is so critical. Otherwise, to both your points, I mean, you could just be sitting there wasting time, and nobody wants to do that. It's impossible to always have tight lines, but man, I want every advantage possible. So what else we got? So we have basically scouting out areas at low tide. I've written down here, kind of knowing thy target species and matching the hatch. What are some other issues or mistakes that you guys continue to see and or have done yourself probably many times?
I mean, I think one we were talking about earlier is, you know, thinking that you have to cast a country mile just to catch a fish. You know, I've caught some of my biggest fish 10 feet in front of me, because I knew that's where the deep hole was. And, and to that point, kind of knowing the zones of where the different structure is, piggybacking on that first mistake, is having, when you first get to a spot, is having, if you've got, let's say, a 3 or 4 rod spread, having them all at different casting distances, because they may be feeding on the bar. Maybe the bait's on the bar and they're feeding on the bar. Maybe they're in the fish highway, right there in front of you, and that's where they're feeding at high tide. So 100%, when I first go out, and let's say I've got 4 rods, they're all out at different distances, just to kind of see where that main feeding zone is. And once I have that locked in, I've got most of my rods in that location. So I think just knowing the zones where the fish are at that time.
And I think to that point, if you watch YouTube or you watch some of these surf fishing videos, like up in the Northeast, and they have these, I don't know, 35-foot rods, and I'm being sarcastic, obviously, but you have these 12-foot surf fishing rods, and they're casting out as far as you can. And now you can even buy those little like bazooka cannons to get your bait out there. And some of that's for shark fishing. But it's a horrible idea if you're, especially like down here in Florida or in the Gulf where Wyatt is. There's a place in the Gulf off Florida. It's a little point. It's a wraparound, and it's loaded with snook. And if you even put your foot in the water, like a lot of people want to go out there waist deep, and like the second you put your foot in the water, you've already spooked them. Like they're all so shallow, you can see them. And so you're actually like way, way, way far. You're far as away as possible from actually where the surf is breaking. And you're trying to like make long casts just to get it in less than a foot of water. And I feel like, and we made that mistake so many times that we finally figured out, like, they're literally right behind us, laughing at us. And we're out there up to our waistline trying to make, even further cast out there. So we've all done that. What are you seeing in Texas there? No, I know, Wyatt, you've been doing a little bit more wade fishing. Your beaches are a little bit different there, but I used to live in Galveston and did a little surf fishing there. What are you seeing over on that part of the world?
Yeah, so like I said, we've got a good spring migration that's taking place right now with these shad that are hatching. We've got the Spanish mackerel that are running. There are some upper slot reds that are moving along the beaches and the jetties and things like that. And I mean, this is it's not just happening here either. This is something that's happening across the United States. And at the timing of this podcast, it might have happened in your area. It might, be happening in a week. It just depends on where you sit on that lateral line, and where the temperature, how long has it started to warm, have those fish taken notice of the warming of the water, because that's what kind of signals everything. It signals the bait to move and stuff like that. So we've had that tough freeze that came through. I believe it might have been a month and a half or 2 months ago. But it's been on a decent warming trend since then. And I would say the past 3-4 weeks, bar one very small cold front, it's been warming up pretty good. So we have had a lot of big jacks showing up at the jetties, which is that's when it really signals to us that there's a big migration occurring, that those fish are not moving for no reason. They're following bait, and the bait is really what's kind of kicking off all the activity in the surf. That's why you've got Spanish that they're moving with, everything's moving with the bait. That's, they're not going to just move to an area and just exist. They have to have a food source. So you're going to be seeing where the activity is. That's really, it looked like the water was boiling this morning. There was so much bait activity. You can see that nervous water. And that's where it really pays to just go out there and look and observe and see where those current rips are. You'll see splashes in the water, and it'll just kind of key you in on areas that are going to have higher activity. Obviously, zones with structure, jetties, things like that. But even when you're surf fishing, you'll see that a current is kind of whipping back around because you've got 2 sandbars that are 100 yards out, and there's a cut between them where that water's flowing in. That's where those fish are going to enter that first kind of trough area as that tide comes back in. And as it drops out, they're going to exit out that way too. Understanding the hierarchy of your beach on different tides is really important, because that's where it's, you're going to have bait that moves in, bait moves out, the predators are going to follow. Understanding how the tide is going to, most people, I would say, they come on vacation, they don't have a lot of knowledge, especially if you're from inland. You're not thinking about tides. You're not thinking about how that manipulates where fish are. I like fishing on incoming tides when I'm surf fishing, because it's obviously going to put a lot of bait and predator fish closer to me because there's more water against the surf. On outgoing tides, I tend to have almost as much luck, but I just prefer incoming tides because it puts more fish closer to me. That's not to say you can't catch a ton of fish on outgoing tides as well. You just have to be fishing. This is, again, the right spot, putting your bait in that cut, in that trough. So, I would say that here in Texas, it's no different than anywhere else. You can have all the success that I've been having with, the jacks, the Spanish, the reds. You just have to be putting yourself in the right spot where there's bait at the right time in the tide. It's been very tide driven when the bite is on. That run will happen for that max coefficient, which is when you've got a good slope in an outgoing or an incoming. If you've got a slack tide, expect for that bite to be a little bit slower. But the current movement where, you've got bait rushing through an area, it's being moved by a tide, fish pick up on that, and they're going to, take advantage of it. And that's when you're going to see that water boiling with Spanish and blowing up with jacks. And you're going to see the reds schooled up. I mean, they literally look like porpoises, schools of 100 reds running up against the rocks, slamming bait against those. It's really, really exciting. It's really fun. It's completely different than inshore fishing. And it's something that's really special. And it doesn't take a ton of learning. It just takes, going out there and observing. I would say it's the biggest thing.
I love it.
You got to put in the time.
And on top of time, on top of tide, time is time of day. I remember I was at a wedding, and this was on 30A, if you guys know that area, in the Destin area, and slept in, wedding, had some beers and stuff. And the next day, this is a very populated beach, and I heard it was great fishing. Like, I'm all geared up and ready to go. And I get out there probably an hour and a half later, no shit have, and the beach is slam packed. Like, I couldn't see far enough either way where it wasn't slam packed. And I walked straight back to the place and put my stuff up. I'm just going to enjoy the beach. And the next day I changed tactics and did both early morning and late in the evening after everyone else was going to get showered, to go out to dinner and stuff. Perfect timing. So especially if you're listening to this, and Wyatt mentioned earlier, we got a lot of people who are great anglers out of a boat or kayak, and all of a sudden they're on vacation and all they bring is a couple rods and a tackle bag. Different story if you're on one of those crowded vacation beaches. If you get out there at 9:30, 10, you've missed it. Not only does it just get hotter and a little bit tougher sometimes, but you've missed your opportunity. You got kids out there and all kinds of stuff, and it's not fun. It's not even safe in some instances if the current's ripping in your line and your hooks are getting around people's ankles. So that's a great learning lesson, especially for summertime when you're on a popular or populated beach. What else do you got?
Absolutely.
Besides
fishermen attract surfers, swimmers, other fishermen.
Oh, yes.
You can get crowded very easily and quickly.
Yes. All right. And by the way, you said casting a country mile. What is a country mile, by the way? I say it all the time too. People are like, what's a country mile? I don't know, it's a normal mile, I guess, but
I don't know. Maybe it's just it's a mile that
none of us know. Why do you know?
My
I want to say
it's a country thing.
I want to say that there is an actual measurement for a country mile. I'm going to see if I can look it up here and
Google it. Someone's going to be listening.
I thought it was just because I grew up in the country.
I did too. I mean, Polk County, Florida. Now we have Legoland, but back in the day, that was country.
It's like everything is just a mile down the street. It's not really an actual distance. It's a mile. We're in the country.
It up. All right.
Urban Dictionary says it's 10 miles per regular. So basically times 10. A country mile is 10 times your average mile.
Just a mile down the street. Everything's just a country mile.
Everything's a country mile.
Obviously, no one can cast that far, but it's basically the whole point behind that is you don't need to absolutely throw out your shoulder cranking a bait out there.
Well, that was her tip. I mean, it basically ties in well with country mile. You don't have to cast a country mile to catch fish. So
yeah,
that's funny. All right, what else? Sorry for that tangent.
yeah. I would say, oh man, fresh bait. If you are going to use natural bait, I see a lot of people go into the Walmarts and buy those. Oh, man, the yellow jacket. They've got that big bee on them, but they sell them in like every Walmart and drugstore that's close to the beach in Florida. And I used to buy them up as a kid and use them, and I mean they work okay. But what works even better is really fresh bait. Usually you can get that if you go to a bait shop. They've got dead shrimp that have died in their live wells. If you can get fresh dead shrimp, or if you don't have the means to keep them alive, the fresher your bait is, the more likely you are to catch your target species. I find it seems like I always catch more catfish, or I always catch more junk fish if I'm using really mushy bait. It just seems like it attracts more garbage and it gets picked off a lot easier. The fresher your bait is, firmer it is. And, tying into another mistake, most people use way too big of hooks. You don't need very big hooks for surf fishing, but, having a nice firm bait that you can put on that hook, it's going to definitely help with the pinfish not picking it off as easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, to that point, let's support our local bait shops. They're pulling it right out of the river and putting it right in their shop. And so, yeah, I mean, we do the same thing. We get, the freshest of the freshest bait. I'm not going to go out and use something that's frozen. I mean, I don't want to eat something that's frozen. And so, I'm certainly not going to try to persuade a fish to eat something like that either. So, and I know that you mentioned hooks. So a big mistake that I see, I actually just saw this a couple weeks ago when I was out solo fishing on the beach, and this guy had a piece of shrimp that, I'm not kidding you, was like this big on a hook that was this big. And I'm like, that's not how that works. Like, let's talk about this. So yeah, I mean, definitely not going crazy with the size of your bait, making sure that it's matched up to your hook size. And because most of the fish out there, with the exception of your tarpon or your big bull red, have got mouths that are very, very small. And how are they going to eat that bait? So I think that's a great point. Why with the hook size, match it up to your bait size, please.
Oh yeah. And you just mentioned another mistake is how big of the shrimp that I used to think that a small piece of shrimp was, maybe a quarter or whatever. You literally with pompano, I could probably get 8 size pompano bites out of your average 4-inch shrimp. Like, you need just a very tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. I think they pick up on the fluorescent. I always use the fluorescent floats on my pompano. I tie my own pompano rigs. That's another thing. Tie your own rigs. You can buy the ones from the store. Definitely don't buy the wire ones. But if you are going to get pompano rigs, I recommend you get the ones with the floats that are tied with fluorocarbon or monofilament. I think the neon floats are what key them in on the bait. And then the scent from just even the tiniest little piece of shrimp, they just come up and nip it. I think if you use anything bigger than just like a fingernail size amount of shrimp, they can pick it off super easily. That's why a lot of people are like, oh, something stole my bait. And you just use too big of a piece of bait. You probably had a decent sized fish that came up and grabbed it. But those pompano mouths, like you said, they're not very big.
Yeah.
Cool. What else? We talked earlier about sitting in one spot, a dead spot, for too long. What do you guys normally do? What's too long? When is it like, all right, I gotta move? And how far do you move?
So I would say that, surf fishing typically occurs in runs. So you'll have a run that occurs for, depending on the species. It can go anywhere from 15 minutes to like an hour. If it's a good size amount of fish that are moving with a pod of bait, or, if it's groups of pompano that are moving down the beach. I don't find it's like inshore fishing where you can have consistent action, for several hours at a time if you're in the right spots. It's really dependent on where that current's moving that bait, at least in the ways that I'm fishing and the spots that I'm fishing. So if I find that I'm not getting bites with natural bait in 10, 15 minutes of me soaking baits, and that's not just one cast. I'll let something sit out there for 5 minutes, redeploy at a different depth or at a different angle. 5 minutes. I usually time things in 5 minute intervals. I find that if anything's running through that area, if I put something in a small trough that I know is 20 feet by 20 feet, 5 minutes is more than enough time for any fish that are sitting down in there at low tide to find that bait. So if there's nothing in that trough and you might have that bait in a good spot, they just might not be moving through there at that moment. Those species might not be moving down the beach through that highway on that side of the bar, put it on the other side of the bar. So I'm constantly redeploying every 5 minutes, but I'll switch complete general areas. Like I'll go to a completely different trough or a different bar every 15 or 20. So I don't know how many casts that is. You divide that up. I'm terrible at math, but I would say that I'm usually, in a different spot until I get on a good run of fish. I'll switch that up every about 20, 30 minutes.
What about you, Courtney?
Same. So it's pretty much the same thing that Wyatt said. If I'm out at different distances and absolutely nothing is happening, it's time to pick up and move. So I mean, maybe 30 minutes on a spot. If I've got all rods out and by the last cast, I have absolutely nothing. It's time to put it in the cart and move down the beach.
And that's not to say that spot's donezo for the whole day. Take note of when at that tide, what you were fishing, and then fish the exact opposite. That spot on the opposite side of the tide. I find that a lot of times coming back to that spot, there's a reason you picked it out and you spent time there. It can be good at a different tide. Again, these fish occur in runs, bait moves for different reasons. So going back there is not a bad move at a different part of the tide. Don't go to the same spots. Always pick a different type of spot. So, if you're fishing a trough, nothing's happening, go fish the inside of a bar and instead, or the inside of there's so many different types of spots. Pick a different type of spot, have 3 or 4 picked out and, divide your time up until you get on a run of fish. And then once you're on that run, don't also stay there after the bite stops. You're usually going to start getting bites really good. And then once it stops, those fish typically have moved on. Give it that 30 minutes. And if you're not getting anything more, pick up and move because those fish have moved as well. It's the beach. They're not going to typically sit in one spot.
Cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned something else, Courtney, is a cart. I heard you say a cart.
Yes.
Probably a mistake to go down there with just one rod and nothing else. It's happened to all of us. And especially, if you're on the beach, normally, unless you're in a few areas like Daytona, I know you can still drive on the beaches. You can do it in some places up north in New Jersey. But for the most part, you're having to park pretty far away, sometimes streets away, and you get out there and something goes wrong. All right. It's happened. I mean, rod could break, your reel could freeze up, something might happen. I would always say at least have 2 rods. And I know you guys might fish with multiple, 3, 4, whatever the rules are in your area. But always have a couple. And those carts, worst case, have a backpack, have something to carry all of your gear. What do you use? What kind of cart? Or is it a homemade one or?
Well, we have a couple. So we have, the Cadillac of all carts, which is this monstrosity of these huge wheels. And I mean, seriously, it's crazy the amount of stuff that we could put on it. It's a little overkill sometimes, right? If we're only going out for only a couple of hours and, we're totally loaded, but I'm telling you, we've always got everything that we need. It's the Mary Poppins cart. Right?
Only costs $5,600.
So that's, and to that point, it was expensive to build. It was, we custom built it. But I also have my little Fishing Mate Junior that I can throw in the back of my 4-door sedan and with my little igloo cooler and that works just good for me too. So it's kind of whatever your preference is. I think it depends too on how much time you have and maybe what beach you're going to. You know, when I go by myself and I use that small cart, I make sure that I go to a beach that has some kind of a walkway, because it can be intense, because I walk a couple miles down the beach with it. So
What about you, Wyatt? What do you use?
Yeah, I've got that Fishing Mate Junior, and before I did my upgrade, I know what you're talking about. If you've got the stock wheels that are on there that come with those Fishing Mate Juniors, it can be tough dragging that thing through the sand, because a lot of times the wheels just aren't going to roll with the tread that's on it. Because what it is, it's a pier cart, but you can make it into a surf fishing cart if you put the beach wheels on it, which are those big orange balloon tires, and you can buy them from Fishing Mate. I believe it's like I want to say it's like a $60 upgrade. You can probably get it on Amazon for cheaper. I got a pretty good deal at the Curie Beach Tackle Shop in the Carolinas. But you know, that's worked for me extremely well. Once I upgraded the wheels, I can pull that thing down the beach no problem, because it just glides on top of the sand and it just rolls really nicely. And it holds, I believe, 6 rods, maybe 5 or 6 rods. And if I rarely keep fish. Typically all I'm bringing out is a tackle box, a chair, and stakes. And I cannot tell you how nice it is to have a place to put everything. I remember when I was a kid, I literally stuff my rod holders in my pants and put the rods in them. So like I'm sitting there and I'm like 10, 12 years old running around. I got rods sticking out of my pants. I'm falling all over the place. I mean, and even when I got older and I'm trying to carry everything by hand, I wasn't sticking anything in my pants then. But I mean, it's so much nicer having a cart, being able to move things efficiently, not having hooks stabbing your hands. It makes the whole experience so much more enjoyable. And if you've got your kids with you, your family, you can put a lot of extra stuff in that cart if you're not bringing a giant Yeti cooler. You know, there's a lot of space in that Fishing Mate Junior. I could take, you know, my whole family of 7. You know, I've got a lot of brothers and sisters and they bring a lot of stuff. I could take my whole family out with that cart. It has a lot of space and I can bring all my tackle. It just makes things super, super efficient. I wish I had it when I was a kid.
I was like, family of 7. I was like, did Wyatt get married? 5
I feel like I need to clarify that.
Our last podcast? What the heck? This guy's been busy.
Yeah, no. My mom, my dad, and my brothers and sisters.
Whew. All right, what else? Any other mistakes that you guys see?
Mm-hmm.
What about tack? Oh yeah, go for it.
I mean, you can kind of play off of what Wyatt said with, you know, having stuff and it being easier with having the cart. But I would say, like, not being prepared. I know that seems so cliche, but if you're not prepared for what you're going to fish for, I mean, when you have these big schools of pompano, or, you know, it's, you know, the mullet run, and, you know, tarpon are busting bait off of the right off the beach. I mean, do you have the proper equipment to handle that? And, you know, a lot of times when we were first going out, the answer was no. And then, you know, we started getting a little smarter to know that, like Wyatt said, if the fish are there, they're there. And, you know, you may have 5 rods going off at one time with fish on them. And, you know, you got to be ready for that. And so, you know, we've always got, you know, extra rigs that we've made that we can easily pop back on. You know, if something gets broken off, you know, we've got backup sinkers. You know, we've got backup rod holders. I mean, everything we've got pretty much a backup of for a just in case scenario. And once those fish start coming through and they're chewing, you better be ready. You know, take your picture real quick and then get your bait back out there, because if your bait's not out there, you're not going to catch them. So.
No, I 100% agree. I actually bought one of those baseball card holder sheets to put my rigs in. So you can buy them at Walmart. They're like, it's like $7 for a pack of like 10 of them. And you make your pompano rigs, and, you know, you obviously don't put the weight on them, but you can stuff them into those trading card or baseball card holders, and you can fold that pack up and it turns into something. It's the size of a wallet you can stick in your box. And then you don't have all of these lines tangled everywhere, and it helps everything stay super organized. I made a video on that, plus like how to use flip-flops to make pompano floats. Like it was I want to say it was like top 5 surf fishing hacks. And I've caught a lot of fish on those flip-flop floats. But yeah, definitely being prepared. You know, that's also to say, don't bring too much in terms of, you know, the stuff that you need to bring, your weights, lots and lots and lots and lots of leader. And, you know, a couple artificial lures. You don't, I would say with surf fishing, artificial lures are, you know, the simpler, the better. You know, this right here, your Johnson spoon, I mean, this thing is going to catch you a ton of fish. Your gotcha plugs, bucktails, I would say that maybe a popper if there's a bunch of jacks in your area. Obviously, slam shady if you're trying to get on, you know, some snook or some reds that are uptight in the surf. But you really don't need a whole lot. I usually bring out a single tray, and I'm able to do that because I've got that trading card holder. I used to have to bring out a whole box so I could fit all my rigs in the individual little pockets. But now that I've got that trading card holder, I just bring out a single tray. All my hooks, floats, beads, swivels, all that stuff fits in there. It's super easy to tie rigs up. And like you said, being prepared, having all your knots tied and ready to rock and roll as soon as you hit the beach.
And I would say fish bites. Out of all the people, and I fished with some really good surf anglers, they don't always use them all the time, but there's always some fish bites. It's kind of like us on the inshore on the flats, is to have some kind of gulp. There's just certain times, like you get a school of black drum that are just so keyed in on the scent. They're not hitting anything. You throw some gulp or just spray it down with some Dr. Juice now. And it seems like fish bites is kind of, there's something magic in it. I know you fish with a lot up there in Jacksonville, Courtney.
Yeah.
Certain types, colors, have you found a difference?
100%. I mean, it goes back to the match the hatch concept. You know, if we're walking the beach and I'm very observant. I think a lot of people, you know, they're walking their beach, you know, they're, you know, looking around, but I'm keying in on, you know, what are the shells on the ground? Not because I'm picking up seashells. I'm looking for the specific clam. You know, I'm looking for the coquina clams. And it's really is a game changer. And I don't just say that because I use it a lot, but it honestly, if live bait is, or if fresh bait is not working, you know, I've always got a piece of fish bite on my hook, and honestly, it pairs well with it, and it kind of can be a bait saver too, right? So they last a long time, and if you say you're throwing out a crab knuckle, it's really nice to throw a piece of crab fish bite on the end of that, so that when you do sling it out there, the crab knuckle stays on. You know, if you hook it properly, it should stay on, but you know, sometimes it does help save your bait, and it makes it last a lot longer. You know, so I think Wyatt was saying something about the bright colors and it being an attractor. You know, a lot of the fish bites, they are paired up with a bright color. So you know, the coquina clam fish bite right now is really hot in the surf, and it's kind of like it's an orange color, and it's, you know, it is doing the job big time. And just like with you know, cutting the pieces of your bait, you know, your fish bites don't have to be some crazy big, you know, big hunk of fish bite. You know, in certain situations that's great. If you're dropping a big piece of white fish bite crab scent for a bull red or a big drum, it's great. But when you're on the surf, you just need a little baby piece, and it'll last forever. But yeah, I mean, so the scents that are kind of hot right now, it's really going to depend on where you are. But you know, the coquina clam, the pink shrimp, and certainly the sand flea flavor are where it's at, and they really try to match up the colors with the floats that people are using. And certainly the sand flea kind of mimics that, you know, white on the back and the orange on the bottom for the roe. So
yeah, that was a hot color for me last fall for the pompano when the sand fleas started having a ton of eggs on their bellies. I mean, the orange and white, it seemed like that was, I mean, it was such a killer color. But I agree with you that I think if you're not sure of what bait to get, go get some shrimp fish bites and some sand flea fish. That's it. I mean, it's so much easier to manage than natural baits as well, I think. But yeah, you don't need a whole ton, just, you know, a fingernail's worth. And they stay, I mean, the webbing that's in those things it's so hard to, I mean, I have to cut them off. You can't pull them off the hook once they're on
Yes.
there. So, I mean, they're awesome. Like if you are going to be surf fishing, I would say fish, but I don't know how I didn't mention it already. Thank you for bringing that up, Joe. I mean, if you're surf fishing, fish bites is a 100% must have, I would say personally.
Yeah, and if you're taking a quick trip and you don't want the mess of bait, it's so easy.
Love it. I think one final one, we kind of touched on it, but it's the overall pre-trip planning. And that means, going to like a smartfishingtides.com and looking at the wind, because that's pretty important. If it's literally blowing at your face at 25 miles an hour, it's going to be really tough to even cast out 10 feet sometimes. So definitely check out the wind. Do you guys have any specific places you like, or even, I guess, more importantly, are there any like conditions that you just love? Like I know with inshore fishing, like you almost don't like bluebird skies and zero wind. You kind of want a little bit. Is there a perfect wind direction and speed and type of environment, tides, moon phases, et cetera, that you just absolutely love, where you're just like so confident that I'm going to catch fish?
You want to go first, Courtney?
Ooh,
I saw you were about to go. I didn't want to cut you off.
It's like double Dutch, who's jumping in first. So I mean, I like a northeast wind, not too hard. I think it does help clean up the water, which in surf fishing is a big deal, having clean water. South winds, they've been really dirtying up the water lately. And man, you get a straight south wind or just a straight north wind and you're standing on the beach just getting totally sand blasted. It's like, this is not my idea of fun. And your line is so wind blown that it looks like it's 40 yards down the beach this way. So I mean, I don't like those straight north, straight south winds on the beach. I just do not like to fish them. So I like it to be a little easterly.
Yeah, I agree. Having like one of those catty corner winds where it's not blowing directly in your face, it's not blowing directly at your back. Something that allows you, it's almost, we were talking about the snook that sit right on that shore, like casting parallel to the shoreline. I'm basically doing the same thing, except a little bit further out. I just like that because it allows me to place my bait in a almost, we talk about when we're inshore fishing, trying to fish your bait with the current. I find that the wind does manipulate bait as well. So I don't always like when I've got the wind directly at my back, because that's usually putting bait a little bit further out. I also don't like when it's in my face, directly blowing in my face, because I can't cast out as far. So that nice, wind that's almost parallel along the shoreline, not directly at my back, not directly at my face, I find makes the best conditions for a fisherman. Allows you to cast far, allows the bait to be kind of pushed towards you as well. So it's a nice, happy little medium there. Again, I said this earlier, I do like incoming tides, but any kind of tide movement is good. I find whether it's outgoing, incoming, that's really the big thing is the tide moving. I don't like fishing during slack tide. Again, you can still catch fish during slack tide, but I don't usually see the fish run. Typically they lock down. That's when you can catch them in a hole or something really easily at slack tide, because they're going to lock down. They're going to go looking for clams and crabs, things like that at the bottom of that hole. But that's not for a very long time, and you have to be at the right hole at the right time. It's basically chance at that point. I like when the tide's moving. I have much better statistically chances of catching fish. So, those are my conditions that I typically prefer. And overcast days. I don't like super sunny. I don't obviously like when it's ripping either, but just like kind of a calm right before a storm, that barometric pressure is moving. Any kind of barometric pressure change, I love that, whether it's before or after a storm, and it's nice, almost kind of slickish on the water, overcast. I mean, that's like the perfect day for surf fishing for me.
Love it.
Yep.
Cool. Courtney, tell everyone too, your brand that you were starting there in Jacksonville. I know hopefully some of your followers here are probably tuning in your very first podcast, which you absolutely nailed. And I know you did a few videos on YouTube. You'll start seeing Courtney on some of our YouTube videos on our channel. And she's also helping out in the insider community now, and just a huge asset. So talk real quickly, if you don't mind, about what you were doing and kind of the overall background, so our audience gets to know you.
Yeah. So when we first moved to Florida, I had this lofty dream of creating a lifestyle apparel brand. And if anybody's ever been in the apparel business, you know that it is very tough, and it is tough to do on a part-time basis. But really, the apparel stuff kind of grew out of the concept that Life for Real was going to be this kind of platform for local businesses. And it initially started as doing live fishing reports. I mean, I would be out on the beach, you know, kind of similar to what you guys do. I mean, there's zero room for error, but sometimes there is error,
Yeah.
and that's what makes it interesting. But doing live fishing reports out on the beach, and kind of given the exact conditions at that time, and you know, giving up some spots, you know, that I was fishing, and why I was fishing there, and it really kind of took off. And so, you know, the biggest thing that I would say that Life for Real was meant to do was to help promote local businesses and then help anglers be more successful. So honestly, the Salt Strong thing ties in so perfectly with kind of what I think my purpose is. And that's to just get really good information out there, because everybody, you know, should be out spending time with their family and their friends, fishing, having a good time, you know, not sitting in the house. And that's what it was meant to do. And I think it did it for a lot of people. And, you know, I did help promote a lot of local business, and I'm super pumped for them. You know, I've seen a lot of businesses grow over the last several years, and I hope I was a part of that. And yeah, getting into the big groups on Facebook, you know, which we all kind of love and hate, but you know, they were a big audience for me, and so I did build up a pretty good following. And so I'm definitely hoping that everybody that was following Life for Real will now start following Salt Strong Courtney, because that's the plan. That's the plan. So it's just, you know, I'm basically doing the same thing, just with a super awesome team of people this time, and just on a little bit of a bigger stage. So super pumped to be here.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We're pumped to have you, and I wanted you guys to hear that, just so it's cool to hear the story and kind of the origin story of people that you'll continue to see, you know, on our channel, on our podcast, wherever you happen to be listening or watching. And so, you know, Courtney had something that was unique and in part-time. And so she's quit her full-time job. She is full-time now as an employee with Salt Strong, just to kind of tie in the loose ends there if that didn't come through clearly. And we're so pumped to have her. And what's interesting, we've had, you know, a ton of requests to have, you know, more surf fishing and pier fishing and just wade fishing, and anything that's, you know, non-boat or kind of vessel related. And, you know, Wyatt's done some there in Texas, some in North Carolina, where he's lived in both places. And you fit a really a massive niche there, just because you do all of that. And so we'll have a ton of videos. I know you've even you and your husband catching tarpon from the beach there in Jacksonville, and a lot of other species that most people probably don't know are even available to catch right there from the serve. So we'll be doing a lot of videos with her. And the other part is the female piece. You know, I've talked about my two daughters, and Shauna was on a recent podcast, a live fishing podcast with us, and I love that. I've seen a lot of requests, and we didn't really know what to do with it. Honestly, people saying, "Hey, you need to get some female coaches, some instructors." And as soon as we saw you, we watched a couple of your videos. It's like, all right, this is the girl. This is it. Like she's the one. And Jake said the same thing. So we're really, really pumped. And our insider club, you know, now it's getting closer and closer, like 22,000 members, if you guys can believe it. And we're seeing, I don't know if you've noticed, because you've been in there a lot longer than Courtney, but there's been a lot of brand new females, which I absolutely love. I mean, it's certainly one of the fastest growing segments of the fishing audience, which is awesome. And I love that for my daughters. And there's now girls getting scholarships for, like, you know, for bass fishing and stuff at college, like legit big colleges. I think it is one of the coolest things ever. So pumped to have you, and so pumped to to kind of be bringing a little bit of a new audience as well, and being able to, let's just face it, women are better teachers in general, especially to other women. As my wife will quickly tell you, she would much rather have you teaching her how to fish than me all day long, 100% of the time. So we're really pumped to have you.
Thank you. And we have more patience.
Oh, without a doubt. And as my 9-year-old daughter Shauna will say, girls have bigger brains than boys, which apparently is scientifically proven. So,
is that girls roll, boys drool?
Oh yeah, yep, it's very true again. Cool. So,
sorry, Wyatt.
If you guys want more of Courtney, definitely come join us in the Insider Club. We've got a lot going on with all the premium education, a lot of the on the water tips. Courtney will be doing some of the reports as well. And a lot of it right now, she's kind of inundated with all the content and stuff and figuring out all the back end systems. But there'll be a lot of on the water reports and some more on the water fishing tips. We have obviously our spot dissections and all kinds of content we're putting out every single week. And then all the tackle discounts. And we got some really, really cool things coming. Hopefully you guys heard that State of the Union that we talked about on the tackle. It has been tough. It's still tough. It's slowly getting better, but there are some really, really cool things that we're personally working on behind the scenes. That's really big. And then the community. That's where we're all spending our time. You know, the Facebook's great. We have a big group, but we're continually moving that, and we're putting our own energy just in this community because it's ours. It's broken out by regions, so you can see exactly what's being caught in your area. And one of the biggest mistakes we talked about earlier was not knowing what's running, not knowing thy species you're targeting. And that community is such a great place. We all learn stuff from it, right? I mean, we're constantly in there learning. Oh, I didn't even know that was happening in this area. So a great place to go, and that's all at saltstrong.com. Come join us in there. Of course, if you're an insider already, thank you guys so much, and make sure to get in the community. We're actually giving away. Austin's giving away some pretty cool stuff every single Monday night just for being active, just for going in there and posting something. You're automatically entered. So we're doing giveaways every week, giving away free tackle and some other cool things happening. So appreciate it. This was a fun one. It went a little bit longer than I thought it was, but I also love for you to get on saltstrong.com and the fishing tips, find this podcast and let us know what other tips you want us to cover. Because this opens up so many doors with both Courtney and Wyatt. I mean, it's unlimited from if you want certain species like catching pompano or tarpon or whatever it might be off the beach, or just pure fishing or wade fishing, jetty fishing, anything you can possibly imagine. We want to hear it, and we'll go out there and start filming the stuff for you. So let us know in the comments. Yep. Comes right to us. That's at saltstrong.com. And up at the top, you'll see fishing tips, and you'll see that podcast right there. Anything else, guys?
Oh, I hope so. I hope to see some awesome comments because I love being able to help people out, especially with surf fishing. It's something that I struggled with when I was younger. So being able to, kind of help shorten that learning curve for someone else is what I love so much about my job. So I hope to see some awesome comments from everyone listening. Let us please know what you want to see so I can get out there and start filming it.
Mm-hmm. And Wyatt just had a killer day today, actually, yes. On the Spanish mackerel. So our insiders get to see that whole report as well. So
yeah, I actually ran into an insider out there. It was pretty cool. Hopefully he's listening to this podcast as well.
That's awesome. Well, Courtney, you nailed it. Awesome first job. I would I'd be willing to wager might be one of the best first time appearances ever. Didn't look nervous at all and knocked it out of the park. I mean, gave you the first question. Thought, hey, you know what? She might stumble here. And we might have, because everyone always says, hey, can we, this is pre-recorded, right? You didn't even ask. You're one of the first people that didn't even ask. You're like, let's do this. So that was awesome.
I like a good challenge.
Nailed it. All right, guys, we appreciate you. We'll talk to you on the next episode. Peace. We out.